Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel. Today we are going to be discussing one of my favorite poems, The Road Not Taken by Robert Frost. In our lives, at each stage, we all have choices to make, regardless of our age, whether we are children, whether we are adults, what to wear, what to eat, what course to follow, what college to take admission in, what movie to watch. Life is full of choices. And it is these very choices that further on in life enable us to either rejoice or regret about the decision that we took in our lives. On your screen now is the text of the poem The Road Not Taken by Robert Frost. I'm sure you've all read the poem already, so I'm not going to read it for you, but I will request you to keep it handy so that you can refer to it in case you require it. I wanted to share with you this photograph of me visiting the Kuno National Park, where we'd gone to see some leopards, or hoping to see some leopards. And as we entered the gates of the park, we saw these two roads diverging. And instantly one was reminded of the poem by Robert Frost, where he says, two roads diverged in a yellow wood. Of course, we didn't have a yellow wood over here, but we could obviously take only one road. The success of our seeing the leopards in this park would depend upon the choice we made over here. And if the visit was not successful, we would have regretted that we should have taken the other road. This is the essence of the poem The Road Not Taken by Robert Frost. Let us now take a look at the very first stanza of the poem, where the poet writes, two roads diverged in a yellow wood, and sorry I could not travel both, and be one traveller, long I stood, and looked down one as far as I could, to where it bent in the undergrowth. The trees here are so beautiful in this yellow wood. These are the birch and the alder trees, and in the season of autumn, their leaves turn yellow, turning the entire forest into one beautiful paradise where the poet is walking through. Here in this slide, we see an illustration of the lines written on the screen. Two roads diverged in a yellow wood, and sorry I could not travel both, and be one traveller. The poet has reached a point in the forest where he's walking through, where he needs to decide whether to take the road on the right or whether to take the road on the left. And he feels sorry that he can't travel both. Obviously, he cannot travel on both. He has to make up his mind about which one to travel. And this is exactly what happens in life when we need to make a decision about whether to choose A or choose B, when we have just but one choice to make. And he says, I stood for a long time and thought, which one should I take? He stood there and looked down as far as he could in the undergrowth, just to see where it was going, to see what lies ahead. This is exactly like our lives. When we have to take a decision, we try and analyze what we have to do. We try and see what the repercussions are going to be of what the future holds. But the future is like the undergrowth. You can only see till a certain distance. Beyond that, you can't see, which is exactly what Robert Frost says, that I stood there for a long time trying to see where the road was going to, but I could not decide which one of the two I should take. And finally, he makes up his mind, because just like the poet here has to decide what he has to do, in life we have to decide and make a decision. He's standing here at this particular point where he's looking down both the roads, trying to see as far as he could which one is the better one to take. And he finally takes the other one. So he's looking down one road to see as far as it could go, and then decides to take the other one. And as he says in the second stanza, and then took the other just as fair, and having perhaps the better claim, because it was grassy and wanted wear, though as for that the passing there had worn them really about the same. The poet says that he looked down one road as far as he could, but took the other one. And what attracted him to the other road was the fact that it was grassy and wanted wear. In other words, not many people had gone down that road. The one on the left, as you can see on the screen, is one which has been trodden, where people have traveled. But the one on the right seems to be untouched, and that is what attracted the poet. That this is a road less traveled by, and perhaps this is the one that I should take when I'm going on a walk through the forest. In this slide, I have taken the last two lines of stanza 2 and the first two lines of stanza 3 to show to you exactly what he meant. In the last two lines of stanza 2, the poet says, though as for that the passing there had worn them really about the same, and both that morning equally lay, in leaves no step had trodden black. As you can see in the picture, both the roads look equally attractive. Both the roads are equally appealing. Both the options are ones which the poet wants to take, because at that point where he is standing, where the two roads are diverting, they are both the same. And that particular morning, the leaves had covered those two roads. The leaves had not been trodden upon either on the road on the left side or on the road on the right side, and they looked equally the same. And putting stanza 3 all together, the poet says, and both that morning equally lay, in leaves no step had trodden black. Oh, I kept the first for another day, yet knowing how way leads on to way, I doubted if I should ever come back. And then he goes on to say, oh, I kept the first for another day, yet knowing how way leads on to way, I doubted if I should ever come back. So he's standing at a point in the forest where there are these two roads which are diverting. He stands there for a long time, looks down one to see how far it'll go, to try and make up his mind which one to take, but decides to take the other one. And the reason why he takes the other one is because it had been less trodden upon. The road on the left side is one where he can see people have moved, but he takes the one on the right because it attracted him as less people had gone on that road. It was perhaps more of an adventure for him. And while he's walking on that road, he says, I'll keep the first one for another day. But he says, knowing in my heart, I knew that while I'm taking the road on the right side, and as I'm going to walk through the forest, although I'm convincing myself in my heart that I will come back to this road, I know that once I keep moving into the forest, I'm not going to be coming back here. Same, exactly the same happens in our lives. When we are standing at a point where two roads or two options are equally appealing to us, and we need to decide which one to take. And we take one option and say, okay, I will save this one, the second one I will come back to another day. But in our hearts we know, perhaps we're not going to come back on this route. And finally, as we reach the last stanza, the fourth stanza of the poem, where the poet says, I shall be telling this with a sigh, somewhere ages and ages hence, two roads diverged in a wood and I took the one less travelled by, and that has made all the difference. The poet says he's being actually future nostalgic, that somewhere in the future he's going to be saying this with a sigh. Sigh, maybe it's a sigh of regret, maybe it's a sigh of contentment, that somewhere, ages and ages hence, somewhere in the future, I will be thinking that there were two options I had to take. And he's repeated the word I because he says, I took that decision. He takes ownership for his decision. He says, I took the road that was less traveled by. I chose to be different. I chose to take the challenge. And that decision of mine to take the road less traveled by, to follow my heart, is what has made the difference in my life. So now take a look at the poem in its entirety. Before we move on to breaking it down into stanzas and sharing with you the poetic devices in each, let's see what the poet says in the entire poem. In the very first stanza, he's talking about how he's in a forest where there are yellow-colored trees. And these yellow-colored trees are significant of aging in life and also of the season of autumn. And he says that when I reached this point in the forest where there were two roads diverging, he says, I looked down one as far as I could to see where it was going, but took the other one, which was just as fair. At the point where he's standing, the area where he's standing, where he's talking about in the second stanza, is more or less the same. And that morning, both these roads looked exactly the same. But he takes the one which has been less traveled by, because it seemed to be more exciting to him. It appealed to him more because less people had traveled on that road. He moves on into stanza 3 to explain that that particular moment when he had to take the decision, both options were the same. Leaves had covered both the roads, and nobody had walked on those roads. So the leaves looked equally appealing, and he could not therefore make up his mind which one to take. And he says that he traveled on one road and said that I might come back and take this other path some other day. But in his heart he knew that he would not be coming back over there. And in the last stanza, he says that maybe many years down the line, I will heave a sigh either of regret or a sigh of contentment. We don't know. But that sigh will be resultant from him having taken this decision on this particular day, that I took the road less traveled by. I followed my heart, and that's what's made the difference. This is exactly what we face in our lives. When we have to make a decision in our lives about what to do, and the decision that we make, either we follow the path that everybody else is taking, or we follow a path which is determined by our heart. We use our mind to think of all the options that we have. And finally, the decision that we make is a decision that is governed by our hearts. And that is probably the right decision to take. And that's the decision that will make a difference in the future of your lives. Now in the following slides, we shall take a look at the poetic devices in every single stanza. The poem is replete with poetic devices. As you can see in the very first stanza, in the very first line, we've got symbolism, where two roads diverging in a yellow wood. The yellow wood is symbolic of autumn. The yellow wood is also symbolic of aging. There's consonance in this line because the sound of D has been repeated. Roads diverged, wood. There's consonance there. In the second and the third line, we've got a poetic device called anaphora, where the word and has been repeated at the beginning of both these lines. In the third line, you've got enjambment. This poetic device of enjambment, where the line or the sentence continues into the second or the third or the subsequent lines, has occurred in every single stanza in the poem. And in the end, in the last line, we've got a metaphor where the poet is talking about the undergrowth. And he says, I looked down as far as I could in the undergrowth. The undergrowth here stands for your future, where you can't really see what lies ahead. 4 poetic devices: symbolism, consonance, anaphora, and metaphor, which are unique to this stanza, and enjambment, which you will find occurring in the other stanzas as well. In the second stanza, where the poet makes up his mind about which road to take, he says, I took the other as just as fair. This is an example of a simile. If you recall, a simile is a comparison where the comparison uses the word as or like. And as you can see here, it says as just as fair. And having perhaps the better claim, because it was grassy and wanted wear. Here you've got visual imagery and personification. Visual imagery because you can see that the road was grassy and it wanted wear. It wanted people to walk on it. Here the poet has personified the road because the road is wanting something, which is a human emotion which has been transferred onto a non-living thing, which is the road. So the visual imagery is of the grassy road, and wanting wear is a desire of the road, which is personification. Enjambment again occurs because the sentence moves into the next line. And as we move into the third stanza, we've again started with enjambment, which is a continued sentence. We've got visual imagery, where in leaves no step had trodden black. If there are dead leaves on the road and we walk on it, they become a mushy black mess. He says that on this particular day, at this particular point, these leaves lay untouched, untrodden. And that concept or image of trodden black that you get is the visual imagery that is used. I would also like to suggest to you that it is a metaphor. If the leaves have been trodden upon and they become a black mushy mess, which is something you don't like, it could be a metaphor of things that have happened in your life in the past which you don't like. But on this particular morning, the opportunities that lie before you are completely afresh. They are new and they are there for you to take. They are there for you to make up your mind. So I would consider the black trodden leaves at not just being a visual image, but also standing for something a little more profound. And then we have repetition in the fourth and the fifth line, where he says, way leads on to way, which is the process of life going on, the process of his journey going on through the forest, where you move from one moment to the other in life and from one place in the forest to the other as he's traveling through. And in the last stanza, again we have repetition, where we've got somewhere, ages and ages hence, which he's saying somewhere down the line. He wants to emphasize the time period. There's assonance, where you've got the sound of A being repeated in ages and ages. And repetition again occurs when he repeats I, to emphasize that it was his decision to take. It was his decision that he took, which has held him in good stead. And as we come to the last slide, and I say thank you to every one of you for having spared your time and been with me as I explained this poem to you. I use the last lines of the poem to explain to you how decisions in your life matter. Two roads diverged in a wood, and I took the one less traveled by, and that is what's made the difference. You have to decide in your life what is best for you. You have to make a decision in a combination of your heart and your head, where your head analyzes the pros and cons of the situation. But as everyone will recommend to you, follow your heart. You follow your heart, you're not going to go wrong ever in your life, because it's the decision that you take in your lives that is going to make the difference in the future. And many years down the line, we will all want you to sigh with contentment, with happiness, and think that I followed that route. I made up my mind to do something, and that's what made the difference to me. Thank you very much. I hope that you have subscribed to the channel, and look forward to seeing you with me in my next video. Thank you.